I'm so happy.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to my initial reaction of Doctor Who Wild Blue Yonder, the second of three 60th anniversary specials that are featuring David Tennant and Catherine Tate returning to the show as the Doctor and Donna Noble, as well as being written by Rusty Davies, once again returning to the show that he showrun from the years 2005 to 2010, the period of which both David Tennant and Catherine Tate were on the show as well. Now, these specials have been hotly anticipated for some time, but if you would have watched my channel leading up to them, you will have known I would have been quite sceptical about the idea of bringing back David Tennant and Catherine Tate and bringing back Rusty Davies. And then last week's special, the first of them, The Star Beast, I wasn't such a big fan of. I mean, I thought it had its moments, certainly, but as a story, as a whole package, I thought it was a bit of a mess, to be quite honest with you, and was not the big triumphant return that I think we were expecting of Rusty Davies returning to Doctor Who. Lots of people liked it, and I'm glad that they did. I'm glad they could find enjoyment in something that I clearly didn't, but ultimately I wasn't really impressed by it, and my kind of general consensus of that was that I didn't think it was a very good story, but the best possible scenario is that it could be a not so great launch pad for bigger and better stories. I didn't like how they gave Donna's memories back, but now that's done, let's use that, admittedly shoddy foundations, to go and have some really brilliant stories. So, what did I think of Doctor Who Wild Blue Yonder? Oh, I really want this review to not just be however long compilation of me just gushing about this episode, but it might be. It really might be, because this story was something else. It was so good. It was truly phenomenal. Like I can give you so many different superlatives to talk about this episode because it was just magnificent. It's you know, chalk and cheese, you know, compared to my review of last week, in which I was quite disappointed and deflated, but it's so different this week. It was phenomenal, and it's something that I've been crying out for Doctor Who to do so long. It honestly just feels like Rusty Davies just came to me and said, George, what is your vision for Doctor Who? What is your perfect episode of Doctor Who? What would you want us to do? And just pluck that out of my brain and put that on screen. It's not perfect, but it's near perfect, honestly. The only problems I have with it are the nittiest of nitpicks. It was just amazing, and honestly it was so different to last week in every possible way. Got such a juxtaposition between last week's episode and this one, because everything that last week's episode did to its detriment, this episode, you know, did the opposite of that and did it extremely well. You know, if that was, you know, exercise into how not to make an episode of, you know, bringing back David Tennant and Catherine Tate, this was an exercise in how to do it with flying colours. It was brilliant, and yeah, I need to actually go into what I liked about this episode rather than just, as I said, throwing superlatives at it. But honestly, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say this may be the best episode we've had in the past 10 years. You know, maybe that is being a bit extreme, you know. Looking back, you know, what's the date? You know, the 2nd of December, episodes in the past 10 years that we had after this point, after the 2nd of December 2013, you know, Time of the Doctor, you guys you will know, if you're a long-running viewer of the channel, will know that I absolutely love that story. You know, World Enough in Time, The Doctor Falls, is also absolutely magnificent. But other than that, I'll be honest, I can't really think of any other examples of stories that even have a chance of rivaling what this was doing. And this episode was so unique in the fact that it's just essentially a two-hander between David Tennant and Catherine Tate. They are the only actors in this story. I've heard lots of people trying to compare this to different episodes, but to be honest, this isn't like anything that we've ever seen. I don't even think you can even say, you know, Rusty Davies is coming back and bringing back the good writing that he used to, because this isn't an episode you would find in his original run. It really isn't. I can't look at any episodes in Rusty Davies' original run and say this is remotely similar to Wild Blue Yonder. It's so unique, so experimental, that I don't think we've seen anything like it on televised Doctor Who. Honestly, in its 60th year history, it's giving me flashbacks and is reminding me of the expanded media. This feels straight out of the catalogue of early Big Finish. And I mean that in the best possible way. Some of the early Big Finish that really just went full experimental, played with the format completely. Yeah, we can have an episode that's a slow burn with just the Doctor and companion in some incredibly, incomprehensible void. And that could work. It had flashes of Scherzo. It had flashes of the Charms of Midnight. And, even before the episode truly starts getting freaky, even when it's just the Doctor and Donna slowly exploring the ship, walking down the corridor, I was thinking, this has the real pace and a feel of an early Big Finish story, in the best way, because last week's episode was far too fast-paced, had far too much going on, that not only did all its story elements buckle under its own weight, but also you never really got a chance to really introduce David Tennant's Doctor, or reintroduce Catherine Tate as Donna Noble in the fullest of ways. David Tennant had his moments, but he never really had those quieter scenes to really showcase him as a performer, and his new Doctor, and what the status quo is between him and Donna now. And you got that in this episode. That as soon as I heard that there's a likelihood that it was just going to be a two-hander between David Tennant and Catherine Tate in this very vacuous, incomprehensible location, I was extremely excited, because if you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that I've been crying out for some high-concept Doctor Who. It's something that I feel like we haven't truly had in such a long time. We often talk about episodes like Blink, Science of the Library, Forest of the Dead, Heaven Sent, stuff like that, but Midnight, Turn Left, but honestly, the reason we still talk about those episodes is because, it's not like we're not getting episodes written to that level. Well, it is, but also no one's trying to do those out there concepts again to make a truly memorable piece of Doctor Who that stands apart from anything that's come before. It's not that we're not getting episodes written to that calibre. No one's even trying to write an episode remotely like it. No one's trying to push or break the formula. Too much of Doctor Who, and I'm not just talking about Chris Chibnall, I think you could go back to Moffat. There's even elements of Russell's era, looking back, that is just too formulaic, too run-of-the-mill Doctor Who. And that's what last week's felt like. Last week's felt like really dull, bog-standard, run-of-the-mill Doctor Who that I don't think's getting anyone excited. But in this episode, it's really trying to push the boundaries and the limitations of what Doctor Who can be, what an episode of Doctor Who can be. As someone who is an adult fan now, you're just crying out for these episodes. And I think that's why me and so many other people have really been drawn to Big Finish, especially, rediscovering the early days, when Doctor Who was really pushing the boundaries of its format, where it wasn't limited to having to be a populist drama. And it could really just do some crazy things and really explore the limits of the characters and the format. And I've been crying out for Doctor Who to do something a bit like that. And it, it's done it a bit, but not in the way that it does it in this story. It was excellent. And honestly, I love stuff like this. I love the location. I love the location of this massive, uninhabited spaceship. Nothing is there. It's so alien. No one's there to tell you what the hell is going on. This spaceship that is just massive, to an eerie extent, massive long corridors with no end in sight, with constant shifts, every so often the spaceship resets itself in the complete middle of nowhere. It's so eerie. It's so eerie. And it is this stuff which it does freak you out a little bit. I'm not going to get scared by an episode of Doctor Who anymore, but I did find it unnerving. This is the sort of sci-fi which I find really unnerving. It's just something that's just a bit unexplainable. Something's a bit off about it. And that's what instantly sets alarm bells off in your head that, ooh, something's happening here. That you don't know where you are. And it's just a bit unnerving because you don't quite know what's going on. That is the setting that I love, and the fact that it's just the Doctor and Donna exploring this location, and it's a slow burn. You could accuse this episode of being, a bit slow to get going, But I don't think it was. I think this was purely necessary in this episode to have that slower pace, to have that slow build-up of the Doctor and Donna slowly walking around exploring this abandoned spaceship. As the tone and the atmosphere sets in, you slowly notice the switching around of the spaceship. Just how long and expansive this is really starts to set into your minds that, God, where are we? Are we ever going to be able to leave here? And then, you know, the mystery starts to creep in as they go into the cockpit, as they find out where they are. They find out little eerie bits of notion that, you know, of elements of what happened in the past that they can't quite explain. The mysterious outcome of, oh my God, the airlock opened and then just closed 3 years later. That's all they know. Something bad has clearly happened on this already pretty unnerving spaceship, but no one's here to tell the tale. You needed that slow burn to not only set the atmosphere in, but also to really explore the Doctor and Donna as characters, to really explore that back and forth and show why David Tennant and Catherine Tate are so extremely good in these parts. Because they really are, and I was crying out for moments like that in the last episode, and we didn't get them. So this episode was all the more strong for doing that. But even, as I said, just them wandering around, allowing you to feel unnerved by this incomprehensible and, you know, uncanny setting, was amazing. It didn't feel like something from Doctor Who, not televised Doctor Who anyway. You know, it almost feels like you're not allowed in Doctor Who to have a location that feels so expansive, so yet empty. Just unnerving by its presence, you know, by the fact that it's not really doing anything, yet slightly does every so often, and is so unexplained yet so empty. Always seems like it has to be populated, or it has to be something that's more overtly scary, to the fact that actually the fear factor is a bit less. You know, it doesn't feel like we're allowed this time to breathe, to the point that you're wandering around and there's no monster there to start with for a lot of the story. And even then you could argue there's no conventional monster in this story. But to just have the horror of the situation really unnerve you and feel tense. Perfectly done. And I didn't think we'd get that, especially with how ridiculously fast-paced last week's episode was. But boy did we get that. I referenced the scene in the cockpit, but that might be, for me, one of the best scenes in the story. Because you find out where they are, and you find out that this massive ship has just drifted. It's just drifted off course, it's become lost, it's fallen through a wormhole, and it's found itself on the edge of creation as we know it. A place, a world, where there is truly nothing. No stars, no anything. Something that we truly can't comprehend, something that is so unexplored, so untouched, that there's nothing there. Something so removed from our own civilization that it almost, you know, the walls cave in your mind even thinking about being there, lost in the unknown with no way of getting back. But it's not hammed up or dramatised. It's just there for you to allow that realisation of the situation being unnerving to really set in, to sink into you and make you feel on edge, like it does with the Doctor and Donna. And there's something so truly scary about space, about that idea of being in the unknown where no man has ever done before, in a realm where, you know, they say in space no one can hear you scream. You're just in a void of nothingness where anything could happen, so far from home. Nothing is out there, yet something could be out there. And that's something that I feel like Doctor Who has never really truly attempted to explore for me, unless you're talking about Big Finish. Because these ideas of, you know, space being truly scary, you know, being so far away from home, just in, you know, this black void surrounded by nothingness, entering the unknown truly, is something that you've seen in films such as 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, Interstellar. I was getting amazing Interstellar vibes from this episode and from that sequence in the cockpit, you know, and Interstellar is moments of that film are some of my favourite moments in all cinema, you know. I don't think the film truly comes together, but there are moments in that where it's like, that is the best scene I've ever seen in a film. this really evokes that, and not in the sense that it's you know, a pastiche at all, not in the slightest, but it's evoking that same level of dread and fright that the true magnitude of the emptiness of space can really bring. And as I said, that's something that, you know, does terrify me, and it's something that you do see in you know, these big, large films about space, you know, really tapping into. It doesn't have to be larger-than-life monsters. It's just the emptiness that's so frightening. And these films, like I said, such as Interstellar, you know, 2001, being alone on a large vessel with nothing but space and machines, you know, that's something that's truly terrifying when you're cut off from all humanity with no hope of getting back. And that's something these large films have explored, but something that Doctor Who has always kind of shied away from. You know, even in episodes where it's like, oh my god, we're at the end of the universe, how are we going to get back? It's never played with quite as much real emptiness as this is. And this is far more scary for me than any of the other times Doctor Who has attempted to portray, oh, we're at the end of the universe, we're at the end of creation. Just, you know, the acknowledgement of the Doctor of, this is the farthest I've ever been. And the monologue that Tennant, you know, gives about, you know, there's nothing here, was perfect. And that's something that, as I said, Doctor Who's never really touched on before, but something that I think is so inherently scary, especially, you know, as you grow older. It's such a more sophisticated concept of fright that I've been dying for Doctor Who to touch. And when you're watching it, when it's exploring these ideas, it really did feel like this is highbrow. This is highbrow sci-fi. I could show this to someone and it's not, oh, it's the silly little kids show with, you know, rubber monsters. No, this is something truly special. And it's the fact, as I said, it's not over the top. It's not over dramatized. It's just simple. Just emptiness. Played so straight, played so calmly by David Tennant and Catherine Tate. That's what's so scary. I must bring up what I think is the unsung hero of this episode. It's Murray Gold. Now, I mentioned in the previous review, and I've mentioned before, that I'm not really a big fan of Murray Gold coming back to the show. I love some of his music in the past, but it was clear by the time of the, you know, towards the end of the Capaldi era, he had the odd good track or two in him, but it was clear that he was running out of ideas. He was burnt out, and that's nothing against Murray Gold. When you've been working on the show for God knows how many years he'd been working on it at that point, you know, you are going to run out of ideas. And, you know, it was right for a change with Segun Akinola, because as much as I love Murray's music, he had given the show all he could give. So it needed a change. And as much as, you know, I do love Murray Gold's music as well, he's not the only sound of Doctor Who. He's got a very known quality of his music. It's very orchestral. And especially going back and watching lots of the classic series, there's an electronic synthy aspect of Doctor Who's music that I really love, that Murray Gold rarely tapped into in his original run. And to me, it almost felt like this orchestral sound is a good sound for Doctor Who, but it's not the only sound for Doctor Who. So I was a bit disappointed that we were bringing him back, because, you know, I didn't just want him to rehash what he was doing before. I wanted Doctor Who to sound different and new, and given that Murray Gold clearly was suffering from burnout towards the end of his run as composer originally, what could he do to really make the show feel fresh? Murray, I'm so sorry for doubting you. The unsung hero of this episode is easily him. His music, phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Maybe easily one of the best scores in Doctor Who's history. It was amazing. I mentioned stuff like Interstellar. This episode's music easily had that same stylistic, you know, influence from it. It was all kind of electronically eerie. You know, just kind of floating, gliding across the galaxy, but there's something just not quite right about this situation. It was clear that he'd looked at films like that as inspiration for his score, because those are the major vibes I was getting through for, you know, this score. And it massively adds to the atmosphere of this story. As I said, that cockpit scene is brilliant from a directing and acting and, you know, just portrayal standpoint, but the music adds a lot to really evoking that sense of nothingness from space. and giving this episode a sense of identity that doesn't feel like anything we've ever seen from Doctor Who before, because this music felt like something that we'd never heard in Doctor Who before. And it adds so much to the scenes. As a production, this story is truly phenomenal. From directing to acting to, the music to the editing, everything. It was great, and Murray Gold certainly played his part in adding that amazing sense of atmosphere to this story that I truly, truly loved. Let's talk about the villains of this story, because after this amazingly beautiful scene in the cockpit, the villains start to be introduced. We've got scenes at the beginning of the story where it feels like someone's watching the Doctor and Donna, which adds to that mystery, adds to that feeling that something isn't quite right here. And then we see the villains appear in what's a brilliant scene. The Doctor and Donna get separated, and both of them, think that each other's come back, but actually they're doppelgangers, they're copies of each other. And, it starts playing in your mind while you're watching. You're like, oh, the Doctor was quick doing whatever he was doing. He's been quick to get back. And then slowly over the course you realise, oh, he's not the real Doctor, and that's not the real Donna. And that line of, oh, my arms are too long, is going to go up in the pantheon of scary Doctor Who phrases. Because it's chilling. It's very chilling. And these monsters are something that would have truly scared the living daylights out of me when I was a kid. This would have given me nightmares for weeks, because it made me feel unnerved now. It's exactly the type of monster that I find so scary, and something that I would have found so scary as a kid. These were incredible creation by Rusty Davies. Were so scary. And back to what I said about this feels like very adult, high concept Doctor Who. Doctor Who is a truly, high art, sci-fi, space odyssey. Were these creations? I've spoken about, the fact that this setting, the spaceship, was so expansive yet so empty. It's the fact of the incomprehensible. The fact that you don't know where you are, this place seemingly never-ending empty. Something's slightly off about it, and the fact that you just don't know what that is, that element of the unknown, is what makes it truly terrifying. That idea of space, the fact you're entering into the unknown, something that you truly can't comprehend, no civilization around you, is what makes that, eternally terrifying. These villains are the same, because we never see their true form. We never find out their origins. We never are even given a name for them. We don't know how they appeared. But they're here, creatures on the edge of creation that we can't even comprehend, so removed from us, seeing the universe trillions upon trillions of light years away, and being bitter and jealous as to why they're not allowed to have the fun that we can. Trying to possess and steal the image and the identity of the Doctor and Donna, but they can't quite get it right at first, leading to some very creepy moments. As I said, my arm's too long with the massive arms, then the jaw drops, and they, start to mutate because they haven't quite managed to figure out the form of humanity, the form of, our physiology. And that's very creepy, because all it is an arm that's too long, a fist that's too big, draped, on the floor like a massive weight. But it's that aspect that it's so close to us, yet just not, that's so unnerving. It's an identical copy of a human, yet something is just slightly off, something so unnerving, that is so much more terrifying to me than something that's so unlike us. It's just something that's just slightly off. It plays into that uncanny valley idea, and I think some people have criticised the CGI. I don't think the CGI is bad on these creatures, but, I think that the aspect that maybe it is, the CGI is a bit off, adds to it so much, because it adds to that uncanny feel, uncanny valley, that they're creating our shape, but they can't quite get it right. And then as they, slowly malform, and it becomes, a demented version of our human form, that's so scary. And honestly, I think the CGI, imperfect or not, really really added to that. The fact that it's just David Tennant and Catherine Tate playing off each other, it's a version of yourself, not just an evil version of yourself, but someone who's trying to assimilate and copy your identity to the point that they could almost replace you. You have to come face to face with your friend, and you're not even sure if they're right, if they are the version of your friend that you knew. Are you speaking to your friend, or are you speaking to the copy? And how would you figure that out? If they've got all their memories, how do you even sort that out? How do you manage to get the right one? How do you know you're safe when you're with the only person there on the ship? Because you don't know if they're real or not. You don't know if that's an evil copy, or if that really is the Doctor or Donna. And what if you think you're correct and you make the wrong choice? Oh, it's so chilling, and it's that idea, and it's so scary because you can imagine yourself in the same hopeless situation. What would you do? And that's what makes it so unnerving. The most scary horror and sci-fi for me is stuff that you can put yourself in that situation, and that's what makes it all the more scary. And the least scary horror for me is stuff that deals in intricacies and directly tied to certain characters, because then it becomes scary because you can't put yourselves in those in that person's shoes. And the most scary concepts to me are stuff that you can picture yourself in that, and that's what scares you all the more. I thought these creatures were truly horrifying by just how similar they were to us, but just how off they were. It really played to the idea of the scariness of doppelgangers, of someone really trying to assimilate your life. The idea that you can't trust anyone, and someone who you think might be your friend might not actually be your friend, but they might be, but you have no idea, and you have no way of knowing. And Doctor Who's done plenty of doppelganger stories before, but not in a way like this. Not in a way like this. The fact that you don't even see their true form, they're not even really explained. It is just the Doctor and Donna on the ship, and the aliens take the form of the Doctor and Donna. So, who is real, who is not, you don't know, and they've got no one else to trust. Oh, it's good. It's really bloody good. It's truly amazing. And as I said, this idea that they're like us, but they're just a bit unnerving. Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. From the unnerving aspect of the emptiness of the spaceship, from just the unknowing element of drifting through space, where on the edge of creation, where no one's ever been before, truly alone, to them fighting doppelgangers of yourself that are like you but just a bit off. Trying to steal your every identity. They could essentially go home and take over your life while you're stuck living, on this empty spaceship, trillions upon trillions of years from, our actual universe, stuck there drifting, doomed to die there, where someone takes your identity and assimilates your life, and you're powerless. That's scary. That's terrifying. And that's why the ending is so truly frightening. And it's actually, on perhaps a negative note, my biggest problem with this story, but it's the nittiest of nitpicks, because it's both a flaw of the story but not a flaw of the story in the same time. Because while you're watching this episode of Doctor Who, it doesn't even feel like an episode of Doctor Who, as I've said before. It feels like a film. It feels like a really trippy, high concept horror sci-fi that just happens to feature the Doctor and Donna in it. And you get to the end, and it feels like the episode wants to do the ending of a film. It wants to have an unnerving ending that leaves you with a spine shiver. Where either the Doctor accidentally picks the wrong Donna, the imposter Donna, and Donna ends up being left to die on that spaceship alone, while the other Donna assimilates her life and the Doctor never ever knows. And the tragedy that Donna's stuck there and dies knowing that the Doctor has made that wrong choice, knowing that the monster truly got away with it. That's eerie. That's an eerie ending that leaves you scared, leaves you in awe. I feel like you either go with the ending where the audience knows that the Donna who goes into the TARDIS with the Doctor isn't the right Donna, and that the real Donna actually died, but the Doctor doesn't. Or it's not so simple. The audience thinks that it's all correct, but then there's almost a last little glimpse that, you know, was it the right Donna? I mean, it might be, but I don't know. You know, leaves you with those questions, doubting yourself as to whether the Doctor and Donna won in the end, whether the villains really won. You know, it's similar to me. I don't know if you guys have watched the film Us, where it's revealed to the end, not to all the characters, but just to the little boy and the audience, that the mother in that story was the doppelganger, who ended up surviving and assimilating the life of the real person, Lupita Nyong'o's character. And it's the real Lupita Nyong'o that you thought was the doppelganger, that was left to die, who had her life torn to pieces. It's the human that lost. And as the film ends, we're slowly revealed the horrifying prospect that it was the doppelganger who survived and got to assimilate her life. That's eerie. That's truly scary. And I think that's the kind of ending that this episode deserved. One that continues the horror and the unnerving quality that the entire episode had. And you could see it almost setting up for it. You know, the bit where the Doctor picks Donna, he's forced to make a choice and accidentally picks the wrong one. And as the audience, you realise, wait, that's not the real Donna. As you see the real Donna, you know, crying and pleading with the Doctor to come back and save her, as the realisation sits in, not only is she going to die on the ship alone, but this other Donna is going to assimilate her life. And no one on Earth will mourn her, because no one will realise she's gone. That's truly terrifying. And unfortunately, and this isn't even, you know, a slight on Rusty Davies, on a slight on anyone, it's just the problems with the formats and conventions of this being a Doctor Who story, that the Doctor and Donna have to win at the end. The Doctor has to realise his mistake, you know, eject the wrong Donna from the TARDIS and come back and save the real Donna. You know, and that, as I said, that's not a slight on the episode, because it has to happen. Because it's the conventions of a Doctor Who story, the Doctor and Donna have to win, you know. It's a problem with the format, well and truly, because the rest of this episode, dare I say, was too good for Doctor Who? That sounds... I don't truly mean that, but what I mean is, as I say, it gave the atmosphere and the feel of a really, truly unnerving film. A really truly unnerving little slice of sci-fi horror. And unfortunately, I don't think this episode could quite have the ending that it really deserved by pure conventions of it being a Doctor Who story. As I said, I think there's far more impactful endings this episode could have had, but it couldn't have had them because the Doctor and Donna have to go home at the end. And that's just the problem when you're playing with the conventional Doctor Who format and this is episode 2 of 3 specials. You can't do what I'm sure Rusty Davies in the back of his head really wanted to do. The fact that he even put that dynamic of the Doctor taking the fake Donna into the TARDIS thinking it's the real one, and Donna essentially almost dies with that horrifying realisation, shows that I think he really wanted to do that, and he put that in this episode to almost show this is the true horrifying, you know, final destination for this entire concept. And I think you could see that he really wanted to go in that direction, but unfortunately was bound by the limited constraints of Doctor Who that he couldn't. But regardless, this episode is phenomenal. My only other slight nitpick is when the Doctor and Donna, the doppelgangers, have the kind of evil fangs and the evil face. It just removed kind of what I found scarier about them, which is, as I've said, was the fact that they're so the same as us. You're looking into a mirror image of yourself that's just slightly off. It's that uncanny valley that makes them so scary. When you start giving them fangs and making them so overtly demonic and evil, I think it, you know, by trying to make them more traditionally scary, I think you actually remove a lot of the fear factor. I wonder whether, you know, the more unsettling nature of them was just a bit too scary for kids, and they maybe had to give them demonic fangs to make it a bit more obvious to us to not literally make the kids get insomnia and not be able to sleep for literal months on end. But it was just something that I thought they did right at the end that I thought took away from the horror of the antagonists a slight bit. But don't get it twisted, those two are the nittiest of nitpicks, and as I said, the ending isn't really even a nitpick with the episode itself, it's just a nitpick with the conventions of a Doctor Who episode in general, that you can't have hard-hitting, endings like that unless it takes place, as an Elseworld kind of story. I want to talk about David Tennant and Catherine Tate because they give some truly phenomenal performances. I think especially when, they're both sent into the kind of the underbelly of the ship and they're both separated, and then they're given the sequences where they think that they've come, face to face with both the Doctor and Donna respectfully again with their versions, but they're not quite sure if they're real or they're the doppelgangers, and they both grew through, a phase of trying to figure out, which is real. And, the Doctor gets fooled. He thinks it's Donna, right up until the doppelganger can't quite hold her form. That's phenomenal from David Tennant, and it's something that I think I briefly touched on in my review last time, but I didn't go into it fully because we didn't get enough of it. There's that moment in last week's where David Tennant gives up because he realises that London's doomed. And there's a real weariness, an age to his performance that we didn't get in the 10th Doctor. And it's both from a writing level, but I'd be more inclined to say so much more of it is just from David Tennant's, development as a performer. Not only has he gotten a better actor, since he was the Doctor originally, but also he's an older Doctor and he's playing it as such. There is such a weariness and, a tragic sense to his portrayal, and not in a mopey, lonely god sense. It's just something else entirely. A real, pathos to his character that David Tennant brings this time around. That is amazing. It's such a phenomenal performance from David Tennant and Catherine Tate as well. I think this episode, doesn't work nearly as well if it's in series 4, because the idea of being on this spaceship, in the middle of nowhere with no one there that you could get stuck to, with a creature who's trying to assimilate and eventually replace you, go back and take over your life while you're stuck here. The stakes don't hit nearly as hard if it's in series 4, because Donna's younger and she's not really got anything to go back to. She's not really got a life that would be, worth losing. But now she's got a family. She's got a child. She's got a daughter. And the true horror of not only being stuck here in the spaceship in the middle of nowhere, never ever being able to see your child again, but the thought of someone taking your form, putting your child in danger, all while your child wouldn't notice, all while you're stuck there never seeing them again, while your child is potentially in danger by someone with your form, and they're never going to notice, and you're powerless to stop them. That maternal aspect to Donna's character now made the stakes of this story hit so much harder, and you can see that in Catherine Tate's performance. Like David Tennant, she's really taken on board the fact that Donna is older. There's changes in her life in that performance. They're both phenomenal, and as I said, in both those moments where they're interrogating their respective version of the doppelganger, trying to figure out if it's really their friend or if it is a copy, a fake, was phenomenal from both of them. And they're both phenomenal as the doppelgangers. I think they play, I say evil, but I say that in such an inverted commas because it's not even an overtly evil performance. They're both very sinister as the doppelgangers, but not in, oh my god, it's David Tennant playing evil. In the subtle ways that they are, in the subtle, twisted ways that they do it. And it's great, and it could be, it's just an evil doctor. But it's not an evil doctor. It's still quintessentially a formless, unimaginable being taking the form and trying to assimilate the Doctor. And there's so much layers to the performances from Tennant and Tate as those antagonists that make them truly scary. And as I said in the episode, it's literally just David Tennant and Catherine Tate playing against each other in a series of corridors. But it's easily one of the best episodes we've had in a deeply, deeply long time. And it's like Heaven Sent, where it's just Peter Capaldi on his own running around a castle, yet the episode's magnificent, and this is the same. This is the same. We get that moment where there's a reference to the Timeless Child, and there's a reference to the Flux and the fact that the Doctor is not from Gallifrey, which I did not expect at all. I never thought that we'd get a moment like this in these specials. I thought these specials would be so catered to, being a perfect jumping on point for people who stopped watching when Tennant left, so it wouldn't really mention, the previous era. Yeah, you got a few flippant moments of the Doctor being a woman in the last episode, but it's public knowledge that the Doctor was a woman. You're not really deeply referencing something that they should have seen in the previous era. But we actually did. We got a reference to the fact that the Flux happened, half the universe was destroyed, essentially because of him. And that is something that you see that the Doctor still kind of wrestles with, something that he's not quite come to terms with, and something that deeply, deeply saddens and bothers him. And that's something that we didn't really get with Jodie Whittaker. The fact that I honestly forgot that the reason that the Flux was created in the first place was because of the Doctor. And I forgot about that because the episode never, spent enough time on that idea in Flux for that to really hit. But you get that emotional weight of all of that happen here. And Tennant, as such a great performer, delivers it masterfully. And you can really see that this incarnation of the Doctor is someone who is truly burdened of the events that happened in between when Tennant was originally the Doctor and now, which is something that I must admit I did doubt would happen. So I'm glad we're seeing it here, and Tennant plays it beautifully. And lots of people have said, oh, it's Rusty Davies fixing what Chris Chibnall did. It's giving the Flux storyline the weight that it lacked originally. And while that's true, I don't really think that's a slight on Chris Chibnall, because all showrunners do that. All showrunners take what happened before in the previous era and build upon it. You watch Series 5, I'm always amazed of how many concepts and ideas that Stephen Moffat directly continues on and builds on from the previous era, from Russell T Davies' era first time around. That idea of, a massive Cyber King walks over London and no one remembers, that was a massive plot hole and fault of the next Doctor, yet Stephen Moffat, in his new era, had no reason to, explain a plot hole from a previous era, from a previous story with a previous Doctor, yet he does in such an organic way in Flesh and Stone, and that very much felt like doing this here, and not in, a kind of snarky way of saying, oh, I'm fixing something Chris Chibnall done. I think it was done because he appreciates the storyline and the dramatic potential that can come from it, and wanted to explore that in a way that fits this Doctor and build the Doctor's character off of that. If anything, it's less of a middle finger and haha, I'm fixing what you did, Chibnall, and more of, a real pat on the back of saying, you set up some really cool stuff, I'm going to continue it. And yeah, it was really, really phenomenal, that scene. But yeah, also this story, I've been waffling on for a while, just going on about how truly amazing I thought this story was. Rats and lyrical about, just how amazing this really was. But honestly, it was phenomenal. It was so good. And I haven't felt this way about Doctor Who in such an insanely long time, man. It's been too long. It's really been too long. And as I said, it's not even a slight on the Jodie Whittaker era. This could be the best episode of Doctor Who we've had in a decade. Is it the best? I don't know. But it's certainly up there. It's certainly one of the best, and one of the few. This was incredible, high concept sci-fi. Doctor Who doing what it's never really done before, at least on televised Who. Pushing the boundaries. Being something that you can really hold up and think, fucking wow, that was amazing. I can't honestly stop gushing about this episode. As I said, even my criticisms, one was the nittiest of nitpicks, and one isn't even really a criticism of the episode. It's just a statement of, this could have been even better than it already was if it wasn't limited by the constraints of having to be a Doctor Who episode and not just its own thing. This was amazing, and even as the reveals and the setup, the idea of the fact that the captain of the ship knew what happened, but in order to not give away what she knew, because as the doppelgangers assimilate your form, they can gather your memories and thoughts and start to think like they do. In order to not figure out her plan, killed herself in the process, and then put the ship to have a very slow countdown, so slow that it didn't matter how many years it would take. It could take thousands, millions of years, but eventually that countdown would erupt, and was so slow, so long, that you couldn't even decipher what it was. That's a truly brilliant plan. And, the knocking on the spaceship, the resetting, the robot moving slowly, the weird announcements every so often. It's all seeded there. It's not like last week where it kind of pulls a reveal out of its ass that Rose had the Doctor Donna in and then tries to make out it was seeded all along even though it wasn't. This is how you seed a reveal in a mystery and make it satisfying. It was great. It is such a amazing example of how to do Doctor Who right. This is what you do. And honestly, I've been so sceptical about Russell T Davies coming back, and even more sceptical of the fact that he seemed to be repeating lots of elements from his era, bringing flat out Doctors back. How much was he really going to deviate from his writing style before? And how much of his new era was just going to be same old, same old? I was worried. But as I've said before, this is not something Russ T Davies would have ever written in his original era. And that makes me excited that this is a man who has new, brilliant, exciting ways to take Doctor Who forward that we haven't seen before and truly bring the best out of the franchise. It was amazing. And I love how much of this story isn't explained. The spaceship's never given a name. It's just on the edge of creation, a vacuous space. We don't really even know where it is. We don't know who these creatures really are. They're never given a name. We never see their final form. And hopefully we never see them again. They don't need to come back. They're so eerie perfectly in this story. And it reminds me of stuff like the Midnight Entity, the Weeping Angels originally. Stuff where you don't find out really anything about them. You don't really see their true form. And that's what makes them so scary. Something so scary about the unknown. And when you see it, and you can visualise it, and it becomes tangible, it becomes, a lot less scary. Someone made that point in my comments, I think, last week, and it is so true, and it's always funny. Were you a time traveller? Did you know they were going to explore those concepts in this story? Because, this episode articulates that beautifully. It was so amazing. And then topped off with a brilliant cameo by Bernard Cribbins. Amazing. Truly phenomenal. To see Bernard Cribbins in his final role, to see him back, God bless him. It warms your heart, it really does. And as I said, I was sceptical. I didn't really like how they handled Bernard Cribbins' character and the off-screen references to him. It felt very cheap. But this really made me smile, and apparently this is the final thing he recorded, so we're not going to see him in the next episode. But even still, this was wonderful to just see him there and reunite with David Tennant and Catherine Tate. It warms your heart, it really does, and really ends this episode on a really nice, a really truly special note. Honestly, this was an almost near perfect 60 minutes of television. It was phenomenal. And I just can't stop singing its praises. It's amazing. Is it the best episode of the past decade? I don't know, but it's certainly up there. Easily an all-time favourite. I wouldn't be surprised to see this easily in my top 10 episodes of Doctor Who ever, and maybe top 5, because it was amazing. Everything I have been crying out for the show to do in so long. As I said, literally, it seems like Rusty Davies has picked this idea straight out of my head. It felt like it was purely catered to me, and I can't stop, just going on about it, because it was truly amazing. This is how you make Doctor Who brilliantly. And honestly, it's kind of sad, because no matter how good the giggle is, I don't think it's going to top this one. But the giggle, we got that little tease at the end of, everyone's going mad, and, you see in the next time trailer, obviously we know. This is the one with the toy maker. I'm slightly sceptical about this episode, not just because, as I mentioned last week, the leaks, which, again, I think were the most brilliant aspects of this episode, was the fact that we knew nothing about it. Literally nothing, and that's what made it so scary, because you're wandering around. Not only did Doctor and Donna not know what's going on, neither did you. So, brilliant from the marketing team there, and that added so much to this story. But obviously the leaks, if the leaks are true, this episode is going to be very divisive and probably do some stuff that I'm not going to be a fan of. But even if the leaks aren't true, we're going back to, probably a conventional, bombastic, Rusty Davies style finale on Earth, which is in direct contrast to, I think, everything that worked brilliantly about this past episode. And obviously Doctor Who is, at its best when, it can be a variety show and it can do anything. So I'm not really complaining about it being so different to this episode. It's just the only thing is it's probably going to do stuff that this episode, purposely avoided, and that's what made Wild Blue Yonder so amazing. You know, this episode is probably going to be slightly different, more conventional Doctor Who. And it's a bit funny, actually, because we obviously see the Toymaker's going to be on 21st century Earth, the big bad of a traditional finale, but, you know, if you watch the original Celestial Toymaker story, his domain and his world and what he's about as a character is actually more akin to the style and the tone and the atmosphere of Wild Blue Yonder. It's almost funny that they've decided to do a Toymaker episode and then do an episode before it that is arguably more suited to the character than what we might get next week. But who's to say? I think that it will be interesting because it seems like, the Toymaker, he's playing games in the sense that he finds people killing each other, you know, it's just my sick little twisted game, rather than, in the original story, he's a legitimate person who actually, you know, enjoys playing games, and that's how he toys with you. So it's interesting how you're taking the concept of the Toymaker to mean different things. But yeah, it looks very exciting. I'm very excited to see the Toymaker back. I'm obviously sceptical because of the leaks. I'm also sceptical because the Toymaker is really great in concept, and we've only got 60 minutes to play with it. You know, it's essentially looks like it's setting up a traditional RTD finale that's usually 2 parts in one episode. So my fear is it's going to be paced incredibly quickly and very rushed, like we got with a Star Beast, rather than Wild Blue Yonder, which really allowed yourself to marinate in the slow burn of it, and that's what made it so unnerving. Who's to say? Honestly, I hope it's good because, you know, as I said, I didn't enjoy the Star Beast, but I love this episode and I loved loving Doctor Who again. So I hope the giggle really delivers. You know, I really hope it does. So some people thought that this episode would have loads of cameos from Matt Smith and Karen Gillan and, you know, Peter Capaldi and Carol Ann Ford. And obviously this episode is the opposite. It's only got 2 cast members in it. And I think if you're criticising this episode because you're disappointed that you didn't get returning characters, I don't really understand that, because yes, we didn't get returning characters, but this episode was so good that it doesn't matter, and this episode wouldn't have worked with any returning characters. The reason this episode works is because there are no characters in it apart from the Doctor and Donna. You know, that's what makes this episode work. So anyone who's saying that it could be improved by having a returning characters in it, you know, you're missing the point. I think people said, couldn't have the doppelganger took the forms of many different Doctors? But I think you're missing the point of what's so scary about it is that it's a carbon copy of that Doctor. It's the Doctor just looking into a mirror, and what's so scary is looking at a version of yourself that's assimilated your identity, but it's just a bit off. You know, so I don't think throwing in other Doctors in here would have worked. As much as I said beforehand that I would have loved if Matt Smith appeared, I'm so glad he didn't, because this episode works all the better for being self-contained, you know. So I don't understand the cry of being annoyed that there weren't other Doctors in this story. I do understand being annoyed that there aren't other Doctors in these specials as a whole, and being annoyed that these set of specials don't celebrate Doctor Who as a 60th anniversary event of the show. It's only really celebrating 2008. And I've been very critical of that. You guys know I've been incredibly critical of that. And in a way, I still am. So I can understand being annoyed that we didn't get more returning elements from Doctor Who's past that isn't just from 2008 in the specials as a whole. But not in this episode. Because in this episode, it worked so much better. You know, just being self-contained. I almost think this episode's so good that this is the only special you really needed. Could have you just had this just be with the 10th Doctor and Donna and just had this self-contained special without the other 2? You know, could have you had my original idea of what I do with a 60th of having 3 specials, each with a different Doctor and companion in it, and this is the one you have for the 10th Doctor and Donna, which could have worked. But saying that, I think so much of the weariness of this Tennant incarnation, the added stakes of Donna being a mother, really adds to this story, and you wouldn't have got that originally, so perhaps this is better that it's the 14th Doctor and Donna rather than the 10th Doctor and Donna originally. Every aspect of this episode was done to perfection, even the idea of Wild Blue Yonder. It sounds jolly, but actually it's deeply dark and depraved and disturbing, which I think could sum up Doctor Who entirely and truly sums up this episode. Yeah, it was brilliant. You guys know that I love this episode, but what did you think? Did you like it? Did you not? Please drop your thoughts in the comment section below, because I really love to have a discussion on this one. You know, did you prefer it to last week's like me? Especially if you weren't really a big fan of last week's. Was this kind of the return to form that you were really hoping for? And on the flip side, did you prefer the Star Beast to this one? I can't imagine how you would, but I have seen that there's some people out there who did prefer the Star Beast to this one. And some people who, how, I don't know, did even like this episode. But whatever your thoughts are, drop it in the comments. Let's get talking about it. And hit subscribe if you want to see more content from me. I can't believe the support on my last two videos. My last two videos are two of my most popular videos ever. You know, in fact, my review of the Star Beast on over 2.3k views, my most popular video ever, which is insane, incredible. I can't quite believe that that's the case. I didn't expect it as well either, so thank you guys who watched that video, liked that video, left a comment, has subscribed since. It really means the world to me, and I hope you enjoy the content in the future. But yes, thank you guys for watching. I look forward to seeing you next week when I review The Giggle, and of course, a goodbye.